you don't want to have your first conversation with your MSSP once you've declared a breach. That's going to be problematic. But the constant thing to remember is that you own that risk. The MSSP doesn't alleviate you of that responsibility, but having an MSSP is one definitive way of demonstrating reasonable care.
This is a Security Weekly production. Security Weekly is a resource of Cyber Risk Alliance.
The Cybersecurity Collaborative, in conjunction with Cyber Reason, is proud to present CISO Stories. Each week, CISO Stories takes a deep dive on security leadership. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/CSC. I am your host, Todd Fitzgerald, and this week we welcome Johnathan Nguyen, Vice President of the CISO Field Team at Fortinet and formerly responsible for the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report.
So great, really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today and to contribute to this wonderful book. So my name is Johnathan Nguyen. I'm a Vice President in the Field CISO team at Fortinet. I've been working in this industry for the better part of, 6 years now? Hell, the industry alone is only 25 odd years old. I joined what was then Bell Atlantic in 1999 after serving some time with the Foreign Service, and I think at that point the leadership at Bell Atlantic thought the internet was going to go someplace and had legs and security would be important. And I was part of the team that wrote the original business case for managed security services at what was then Bell Atlantic, and then we progressively built what became the largest MSSP in the industry at Verizon. I served 16 years at Verizon. And then my last gig at Verizon was running the Data Breach Investigations Report. So a lot of experience across that time about what works, what doesn't work, the evolution of what we call now cyber.
A lot of people rely on that Data Breach Investigations Report.
It is a great source of insight, but at the same time, I think that one of the largest insights from that body of work was that we're still failing, right? And when you take a look at not only the Verizon report, but like Fortinet's FortiGuard Labs report, or SecureWorks report, or AT&T's report, or Rapid7's report, which is about anybody's report, including the public sector reports on the FBI, the Secret Service, the Australian Signals Director, the National Cybersecurity Center, all of these places. They fundamentally come down and they say, look, we're still missing out on basics of what we call hygiene, vulnerability management. Heck, every survey, every statistic still points to the fact that the vast majority of successful exploits are against known vulnerabilities for which a patch has already been available. And I think that's a very telling statistic, because it says even when we have perfect information about where the vulnerability is, right, where the threat vector is, right, and here's the mitigating control that you can implement, we don't do it. And the question is that why? And so along the last 20 odd years, cybersecurity spending has gone to the point where this year it'll be north of about $130 billion, right? And so we poured investments into it, a lot of human energy, a lot of human potential. And at the end of the day, what do we have to show for it? Well, we're still failing on basics. And in fact, the number of data breaches continues to grow. I'm not sure whether it's a result of successful attacks or the fact that we have to report them. And the impact of those data breaches continues to grow. And so, my background is looking across that time period, looking and trying to discover the root causes of disruptions and data breaches, but what's the right approach to getting things right to begin with? And that was the evolution from what we called network security, into IT or IP security, into what we now called cybersecurity.
So what really surprised you with those reports that you were responsible for at Verizon?
I think the one thing that surprised me the most was that it was in many ways the same findings year over year, not just at Verizon, but at other reports too. You find when you look at the executive summaries of these great bodies of research, what do they tell you? They tell you consistently over time, and you can look at the summaries of the recommendations, and what are those recommendations? They're basic security controls. They talk about use strong passwords before the author of that approach and this that don't use that approach any longer. They talked about segment your networks. Use firewalls to separate your internal network from the public internet. Use multi-factor authentication, let alone two-factor authentication, right? Implement a rigorous approach around application vulnerability management. Use some compensating controls. Use a balanced approach between detection and incident response. In essence, a balanced risk management approach. The thing that strikes me the most was a conversation I had with Admiral Rogers when he was in charge of US Cyber Command. And he said, Jonathan, cybersecurity is not a DIY exercise. I said, you're right. But when you take a look at the largest data breach, was the largest impact, whether you're talking about Equifax or OPM or Home Depot, you name it, those were large enterprises, global enterprises or public sector organizations with deep security benches and large war chests. And yet they were the victims of successful security attacks. So what does that tell you? If the largest organizations with the deepest funding have failed at it, it's not a DIY exercise, and nobody can really do this alone.
So what would you tell the small company that doesn't have those resources?
Well, I think the object of the exercise in security isn't security. It's about ensuring the ability of the organization to function, to deliver the outcome, whether that is a customer experience, whether that is a transaction, or that is an operational technology function that has to be available. The object of exercise isn't compliance either, and that's part of it. When you take a look at the latest regulatory frameworks and standards, there's a notion called reasonable care, and that you will implement measures and technologies and processes to identify and manage risk. And I think irrespective of that, of whether you're a small or large enterprise, cybersecurity is fundamental now. And so what I would advise is, whether you're a small or a large company, and I think this is what's shaping managed security services today, and we see that across the diverse set of solutions being available, what is your core competency and how will you deliver a reasonable level of care in managing risk? And for the smaller companies and large, I say focus on your core competencies. I don't think that anyone today should really be doing event monitoring. I think that much of what we call security hygiene should be done by a third party. A lot of the more mundane things, the event monitoring, right? The escalation to the internal team to do the fundamentals of incident response and then make it a closed loop. One of the self-evident truths of cybersecurity is that there aren't enough skill sets available, let alone experienced people. So there aren't enough hands who are trained to do the work, and then there aren't enough people who have the skills and the experience to make judgments. And so that points out a fundamental conclusion that you cannot solve a problem that's operating at machine speed by throwing more humans that don't exist at it. And so what we have to find ways of doing is to automate those mundane tasks, to apply technology and like AI to automate and scale at speed and scale and operate at speed and scale to go forward. And so for the smaller organizations, I would say you may want to take a look at a managed security services provider.
So you wrote a great piece on there on how to select an MSSP and some considerations around that. So could you talk a little bit about that? How does somebody go about that?
Yeah. Well, the first thing we have to recognize is that we are the owners of risk. And whether you're a large enterprise or small enterprise, the person, whether it's a CISO or an IT manager or just Charlie or Charlene IT sysadmin person, you own that risk. And it's your job to manage that risk. And whether you do it internally in an in-house solution or whether you partner or some combination with a third party, you will always own that risk. And so from there, you say, well, what is my core competency? What is my risk posture? Right? What is my risk exposure? What are the controls and services that I'm going to bring to bear to mitigate that risk, right? And then from there, what is left? But the residual risk, right? And is that the risk so large that we can't stomach that and we've got to transfer that to an insurance company or some other methodology? But the hardest part about cybersecurity today is understanding and managing that risk. So for a small company, what is it they really need to do? Are they part of a supply chain where they have to certify that they have the following capabilities? And by the way, contract awards are now contingent on cyber readiness. And you'll see that in the DFAR, the US government federal acquisition regulations. You'll see that in the Fortune 500 supply chains, because all of these things are interrelated. It comes down to understanding what your requirements are. What is your exposure? If you don't have a large exposure, then maybe you don't need that much security. But the larger your exposure, the more comprehensive your solution set needs to be. When you look at an MSSP, then you've got to understand what is it you're trying to, what is the outcome you want to achieve, and work backwards. Whether it is a large shared multi-tenant MSSP where it's a one-to-many solution and they're going to provide security event monitoring, they're going to alert your SOC and your team to do incident response, or whether you're going to outsource.
Then you still need people on your side,
right? Absolutely,
to work with the MSSP.
No matter what, you will always own that risk. The MSSP doesn't own that risk. And so you're going to have to manage them. And the other thing today is that there's a change in the way we think about what are the objects they exercise. Most security teams today are being measured not only by their traditional KPIs of true, false, positive rates, mean time to detection, mean time to mitigation, mean time to remediation, vulnerability management checklists. Those are all traditional KPIs, and they're so useful. But equally important today are the ability to deliver agility, innovation, productivity, and the enhanced user experience or customer experience. Those are the main metrics today. I had a CISO tell me, Jonathan, those traditional metrics are great, but that CFO, my CEO, only cares so long as the business is operating. And yes, it's great that we're secure, but if we're not operating, it doesn't really matter whether we're secure or not.
The article this podcast is based upon can be viewed in the best-selling cybersecurity leadership book, CSO Compass, Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers, available at Amazon.com and other booksellers. That's really table stakes then, all those other operational measures that a lot of organizations still aren't doing today.
Yeah.
Are the baseline, and so they're really looking to the CISO more for innovation.
I think across the board, CISOs have to go from being enforcers to enablers. And CISOs today have to really understand how to enable the business. And so how do you deliver innovation, agility, productivity, enhanced outcomes, enhanced quality of life and business outcomes, while at the same time delivering a reasonable level of care that you have identified and managed the risk in your organization. So when you look at the classic cases that now form the basis of this construct, when you look at Equifax, and the Northern District Court in Georgia has held that they did not undertake a reasonable level of care when they didn't do the following things: that they didn't have a proper CISO quote in place, that they didn't have multi-factor authentication, that they didn't have compensating controls in the forms of things like internal segmented firewalls that had updated certificates, right? When you look at other cases in the past, the organizations that had data breaches were storing their PII in the clear. I mean, these types of lessons repeat themselves. And I say that because in somewhat, I'm a little bit frustrated. I was a victim of the OPM data breach. And when you take a look at all of these large data breaches that have occurred over the last 5 years, you would think that we had learned something since OPM, for instance, right? But yet, what do we find out at the beginning of the week going into the RSA Security Conference, right? Defense Information Systems Agency, the Defense Department agency that handles non-classified communications, the email systems, sent out a form letter to people ranging from 3-4-star generals down to enlisted personnel that said, "Dear sir or madam, your PII may have been compromised." We're still seeing those things. So I think that for an MSSP, you take what Admiral Rogers said, which is that it's not a DIY exercise. you really do need someone who has scale, who has access to really good intelligence, who can integrate that with visibility and can automate the response. Today, through digital transformation, what we call an enterprise is so expansive. There are things that were never designed to be interconnected that are. Air-gapped environments that are no longer air-gapped. Vehicle management systems that are now IP-enabled. 5G will enable a rapid shift of computing from the cloud to the edge. What we're really going to see is that in the next 3 to 5 years, 85% of all the computing and data generated will not be traditional IT processes. In fact, what you're going to see is more computing on the edge and the cloud becoming a correlation and storage platform. And so security is going to shift again. So the level of complexity is going to grow, the volume of data is going to grow, the variety of data is going to grow, and so will that be matched by the threat environment and the complexity of the threat actors.
So if we're depending on this MSSP, how do we make sure with the MSSP that we have the right things in the contract? Are there certain things that we should be paying attention to, or certain clauses?
Oh, absolutely. I always say, I'm looking for an MSSP that's going to be my partner. I want that MSSP to understand what are the business outcomes that I need to deliver, what critical processes and applications need to be available, and at how many nines. I'm going to want an MSSP that is focused on delivering an outcome to me as a customer. I want an MSSP that's going to be focused on the user experience. I want an MSSP that is going to have a web-based portal that I can access via my phone. I want an MSSP that's going to allow me to do self-generated, on-demand reports across hundreds of different standards. So how do I compare on any given day against, say, the NIST framework, or the Australian Signals Directorate mitigation strategies, or the mitigation strategies outlined under the CCPA or GDPR, or any number of these regs, right? Where are my lists of critical vulnerabilities and things that need to be mitigated? And ultimately, where are they in terms of remediation? I'm going to look for an MSSP that I can get tremendous levels of granularity, and then also works with me to close the loop. I'm also going to work with an MSSP where I can see very tangible results about my usage and my consumption, right? The essence of MSSP is predictability. I mean, if you're shopping for MSS, you want greater predictability in terms of outcomes, what is being delivered, and that should improve over time. You should be able to see from the first time you begin the relationship with an MSSP, every succeeding quarter, that you have fewer false positives, right? That you have more efficiencies of scale, better productivity in your service provider, and they're going to work with you. I'm also going to look for an MSSP that has deep operational experience in the technologies that I want to operate. I'm also going to look for an MSSP that really has a lot of threat intel capability. And what does that mean? That means the ability to tap into not tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands of different customer sets and environments where you see what's happening in the wild. I want to see a research staff that doesn't number in the dozens, but in the hundreds of malware researchers. I'm going to look for an MSSP that can demonstrate that on any given year, they found X number of zero-day vulnerabilities, right? That they've helped law enforcement.
Provide that information to you if you ask that, or how do you know that you're getting good information? Or,
sure.
Or is there...
You want to look and see whether they're first of all, the analyst reports for one, right? So whether it's Gartner or Forrester or NSS Labs in terms of equipment. You're going to look and see what types of associations they belong to. Do they have partnerships with things like the Cyber Threat Alliance, of which Fortinet is a founding member? Do they have relationships with law enforcement and national security agencies, right? How many labs do they have? How many threat researchers do they have? How many of their customers allow them to see anonymized data, metadata coming from their environments? All these things should be published, and then they should be proud of that, and you can begin to really gauge. You want to ask them in terms of, are they using artificial intelligence? How many years has that artificial intelligence platform been in existence? How many billions of nodes have they built to train that artificial intelligence capability, right? And then finally, you're gonna work with them to understand, when are you gonna do the vulnerability scans, right? Who is my dedicated resource on your team that I can work with? I want to hold tabletop drills, because the one thing that also the Admiral Rogers told me is no one ever drills with U.S. Cyber Command. And so many of the cases in my experience has been few people actually drill with their service provider to really understand what happens when you declare a breach or a significant incident. It's the same way when you're working with a cloud services provider in a shared services model. How well do you really know that MSSP? You don't want to have your first conversation with your MSSP once you've declared a breach. That's going to be problematic. But the constant thing to remember is that you own that risk. The MSSP doesn't alleviate you of that responsibility, but having an MSSP is one definitive way of demonstrating reasonable care.
Well, good. Well, this was very, very insightful. Do you have any other comments around the MSSPs?
I think that the MSSPs going forward today that'll be successful and will be the ones that are very, very focused on a specific market set. You cannot be all things to all people. You are either going to be a shared multi-tenant platform that addresses the mid-market and does it broadly, and it's all about scale, or you're going to be a highly bespoke solution set that does customized solutions.
Well, I think the data breach Verizon report shows, all the different industry verticals and how different threats and different solutions are applicable to each. So, that makes a lot of sense that you would want to line those up together.
Yeah, so the ones that focus extremely on their particular market niche, the ones that are profitable. The ones that try to boil the ocean and do all things becomes very difficult. And that's what I advise most MSSPs to do, is to understand your market, focus on delivering onto that market, and be successful.
Well, great. Well, great, Jonathan. This has been a much needed information for CISOs. Really appreciate you taking the time and for your great contribution to the CISO Compass book.
No, it was my great pleasure to be part of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Cybereason is the champion for today's defenders, providing an endpoint security platform to prevent, detect, and respond to malicious operations on computers, mobile devices, servers, and the cloud. Cybereason. End cyber attacks from endpoints to the enterprise to everywhere. Learn more at cybereason.com/CISO stories.